David Loy, bienvenido a Gente Bonita, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to join you from Colorado in the USA.
Thank you very much. Y Bete Filan, muchísimas gracias por estar también aquí, porque nos vas a ayudar a traducir esta conversación que vamos a mantener David y yo. Es que ricasco.
Encantada, postena, es que ricasco, Suri.
David, ¿quién eres?
In terms of my own personal history, I'm a professor of comparative philosophy and religion, now retired. I've also been a long-time student of Zen. I lived and practiced in both Hawaii and Japan. And so now that I'm retired from academia, I'm focusing more on Buddhist teaching and Buddhist practice, and especially sort of bringing Buddhist practice together to address the kinds of ecological and social problems that we have today. In the Zen tradition, there are many possibilities that reveal my true nature. The important thing is to overcome the illusion of separation. The idea that I'm a pure soul or a self inside that's separate from the rest of the world outside. That's why anything I do can be an expression of my true nature. I am Yvette. I am entre mujeres, right? I am the people suffering in Ukraine. I am the Russian soldiers who are also suffering and doing terrible things in Ukraine, right? I am the people in India suffering from the heat. I am the temperatures that are causing them so much suffering. The important thing is to overcome the sense of separation and to realize our non-duality with all of these situations.
¿Por qué nace la capacidad de individualizarnos, de creernos una parte separada del todo? ¿Dónde surge esa separación?
Let me start by saying it's important to emphasize it's not about where duality comes from, because really the duality doesn't exist. It's the sense of duality. It's the sense of separation, right? Waking up in Buddhism and other spiritual traditions, it's not about gaining anything new. It's simply about realizing the way things have always been.
Que realmente no existe la no-dualidad, sino simplemente es la sensación de sentirte una parte separada, pero que realmente no existe.
Well, I think it makes a lot of sense to understand this as a kind of survival function. I think if we look at evolution, especially evolutionary psychology, we can see that the development of a sense of self could be very helpful in helping one survive and propagate. And people who didn't have a healthy sense of self or ego were less likely to successfully have children and so forth. So I think there's an evolutionary function built in. The problem is, as far as evolution is concerned, it doesn't care whether we're happy or not.
¿Cómo dio David el paso de la dualidad a la no dualidad? ¿Cómo se dio cuenta de que vivía en una ficción?
I grew up during the Vietnam War era, a stupid, illegal, immoral war, and I refused to go. So at one time I expected to go to prison, but laws changed and I didn't have to do that. So after the experience of being a social activist, I realized that wasn't enough, that I also needed to work on myself. That's when I dropped out and moved to Hawaii. Hawaii was my, I guess we could call it my hippie years. But during that time, I was also reading a lot of spiritual literature, especially Zen. All my degrees, by the way, are in philosophy. So a Zen philosophy sort of made a lot of sense to me. But what was really important was not so much the reading, but the fact that there was a Zen center in Hawaii, and I was able to do some very intensive meditation retreats in Hawaii with a Japanese Zen master, and that really transformed my life. So the Zen tradition gives us very specific meditation practices or techniques that can help us, as we say, forget ourselves, let go of the sense of separate self and realize our non-duality with other people and the world.
¿El fin de la meditación es la anulación del yo?
Well, there are two ways to understand it. One of them is to say, really, when you are meditating, there's no goal, that it's important not to have fixed in your idea that you're trying to get somewhere. But the other side is, we can say, yes, that if we meditate in a certain kind of way, what happens is that, let me say it this way, our usual sense of self is composed of habitual ways of thinking and feeling and acting. It's the way that they work together to create the illusion of separation. When we are meditating, we are letting go of those habitual ways of thinking and feeling and intending. And in doing that, we are letting go of the sense of separate self.
¿Por qué busca la mente?
Because the sense of self, as Buddhism says, is not real. We have a feeling of separate self, but it's not real. It doesn't correspond to anything. And that means that the sense of self is inherently insecure. It's inherently uncomfortable. And it's always looking for something that can make it more secure. And that's a lot of the problem with our lives, is that we're always looking for something outside that we think can make us feel more real, more complete.
Esa sensación de separación lleva al ser humano a una búsqueda. Y entonces es muy curiosa la paradoja del ser humano, ¿no? Que digamos que el yo se embarca en un viaje espiritual de búsqueda, usa el conocimiento para llegar a un punto de entendimiento y luego se acaba porque se da cuenta de que no es ese yo.
That's the success of the journey, is realizing that there never was a self to begin with. Yes, a separate self. Yeah.
Y esa separación es la que ha llevado a la realidad que estamos viviendo hoy en día, que los seres viven en una especie de caparazón egoico, están viviendo en una isla egoica que ha llevado a un momento de la humanidad especialmente delicado. A ver si puede explicar cuál es la relación, David, a ver si puedes explicarnos cuál es la relación que existe precisamente en esa sensación de separación y la realidad que estamos viviendo, no solo como humanidad, sino también la crisis ecológica que se está derivando de esa conciencia de separación.
Not only on the individual level, but also on the collective level. In other words, the problem isn't simply that individuals have a sense of separation, but that also we, as a now global modern civilization, have a collective sense of separation from the earth. And really, you could say it's pretty much the same problem. And it has the same consequences. Because I feel separate, when I feel separate from other people and the rest of the world, there's a lot of suffering built into that. You know, because the sense of self always feels insecure. We can say the same thing about our ecological situation. The fundamental root, which no one wants to talk about, is that we as a species feel separate from the earth. The earth is an object. It's something for us to exploit. It's something for us to use. We feel no responsibility to it. We just use it for our own well-being. And we haven't realized that our own well-being is not separate from the well-being of the earth.
El planeta se está haciendo inhabitable, se está derrumbando el sistema porque estamos viviendo en un sistema neocapitalista.
We naturally talk a lot about the climate crisis. You know, that's the most urgent. And it's true that we really need to focus on it. But we also need to realize that the climate crisis is just the tip of the iceberg. There are many other ecological crises, loss of biodiversity, the fact that so many other species are disappearing, many kinds of pollution in the air, in the earth, in the water, in our bodies, and we can go on, but there are many ecological issues. And it's important to realize that, because otherwise we might think, oh, if we can just control the carbon in the atmosphere, then the world, our civilization can go on the way it has. And in fact, what this crisis shows us is a fundamental flaw in the way that our civilization is organized.
Cómo pasar a una conciencia no tan egoísta, sino cómo pasar a una conciencia más plural, más altruista.
Buddhism doesn't talk about good versus evil. That's a Judeo-Christian way of thinking. Instead, Buddhism talks about the three poisons or the three fires, right? And the idea is that when what we do is motivated by these three poisons, it creates suffering, it creates problems. The three problems traditionally are greed, ill will, and delusion. I did want to add, right, traditionally, Buddhism understands the three poisons as personal problems, individual problems, right? Today, it's also important for us to understand them as collective, as institutionalized problems. For example, I think that our economic system is institutionalized greed. If greed means you never have enough, well, that's a very good description of an economic system that has to keep growing, right? Consumers never consume enough. Corporations never profitable enough. Grow, 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 more and more and more. But here's the question. Why is more and more always better if it can never be enough?
Y esto es un reflejo, en cierta manera, de lo que es nuestro ego, que nuestro ego se sabe vacío y cada vez necesita más y más para, en cierta manera, huir de la muerte, o huir de ese vacío. Quiero decir que la sociedad es un reflejo de nuestra manera de vivir en la dualidad. Nunca nos vamos a satisfacer como egos porque el ego en sí mismo es un vacío y siempre busca en el exterior saciarse.
It's now a problem of collective ego. Or some people, we say, we go in English, we go. The problem with separation is that it's inherently uncomfortable. That applies not only on the individual level, but I think collectively too. We feel that something is lacking, and we try to fill it up in one way or another.
Sí, y el mercado se ha convertido en una religión y la economía en una teología.
For most people in developed modern nations, the true religion is consumerism. Even if you go to church on Sunday mornings, for the reality is what's really important about your life, the meaning of your life, is built around consumerism. And Buddhism, like other traditions, emphasize that can be fun for a while, but it can never be ultimately satisfying.
Todo el camino espiritual del budismo trasladado a Occidente se ha convertido también en un proceso individual de yo necesito mi propio desarrollo personal, lo que en cierta manera eso incide más en ese concepto de separatividad.
That often happens. I'm reminded of my favorite, maybe my all-time favorite quotation by a Vedantic teacher, Nisargadatta. He said, "When I look inside and see that I am nothing, that's wisdom. When I look outside and see that I am everything, that's love. Between these two, my life flows." He's a Hindu Vedantic teacher, but this is a very Buddhist understanding as well. They're not concepts. They are realizations. They are things that we understand. Yeah. And it's interesting. For him, it comes down to wisdom and love. And really, it's the same in Buddhism, right? Those are the two pillars of the Buddhist path. But both of them are important. This points to a really, maybe we can say, the heart of the issue, because there's often another duality between those who are on a spiritual path transforming themselves and those social activists who are concerned to transform the world. This is a very serious duality that is very problematical.
¿Qué es para ti el amor?
Love is not a feeling. Love is not something that comes and goes. Love is the realization that I'm not apart from you or apart from other people, and integrating that realization into how I live, into how I relate to you and to other people.
El amor es reconocerse en el otro.
Right? It's not a projection of my personality or my expectations on you. It's the opposite. It's letting go of my own egotism enough so that I can actually see you, experience you as you are. And then how do I live in a way that acknowledges that I'm not separate from this you?
No hay yo y tú. Hay un todo.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that my body disappears and I become your body. There's still a sense of, two people, or there's still the sense of something that's participating in something greater than oneself.
Entonces, la muerte del ego resolvería este problema, el problema que tenemos actualmente como sociedad.
The problem is that many people get stuck here. There's a kind of irony. We begin to follow the spiritual path because there's some suffering. And as we follow our own personal, it's usually very personal. It's my own ego that's causing suffering. And we have the sense that the spiritual path can lead to something that will end the suffering. The danger is that at the beginning, it's still an egotistical path. The great realization, the deepest enlightenment, is seeing that this self-preoccupation is the fundamental problem. And that when I really wake up, there's no one that needs to become enlightened. There's never been anything lacking. And that's because realizing my intimacy, my non-duality with the world. Now, what's important here is you can have spiritual people who leave me alone so I can realize my own emptiness. And then you have activists who sometimes criticize the spiritual people for being selfish. What we need is what's called the Bodhisattva path in Buddhism. The idea of the Bodhisattva path is that our spiritual journey has two sides, like a coin. On the one hand, we continue to work on our own meditation, our own individual transformation, overcoming our ego. At the same time, we know that personal awakening is not enough. We also need to be engaged in the world. And here's the important thing. Engagement in the world is not a distraction from the spiritual path. Engagement in the world is how we become more selfless. It is also how we become less self-preoccupied, less selfish, you see. So the two parts of the path are deeply interwoven. And that's the essential path that we need today.
¿Qué es la vida?
Is what we create of it. Our life is what we do. The important question is, are we controlled by greed, ill will, delusion? Are we controlled by the suffering and the attempt to feel that more real, more grounded? Or if we can be free of that, then our life transforms. As long as I feel separate, my life is going to be about what's in it for me. What can I get out of the world to fill up my sense of inadequacy? But if we can let go of ourselves and realize our non-duality, then we're free. But because we don't feel separate, the freedom will naturally express itself as, well, what can I do to make this a better world for all of us? And this isn't some heavy responsibility. It's simply some natural way that we want to live when we realize that we're not separate from other people. So then there's the question, what's the best way for me to do that? And it may be different than the best way for you.
¿Y cuál es el mejor camino?
Sometimes people ask me, because Buddhism, the Buddha lived a long time ago in a different place. If you study the Buddhist teachings, they don't talk about the ecological crisis. They don't tell us what to do, really. They tell us how to do things, but not what to do. So people, they ask me, and they say, well, I want to be a bodhisattva. I want to be eco-sattva. What can I do? And I think there are three questions, three meditations that we can ask that can help us answer that question for ourselves, because each of us is different. I can't tell you what to do, but you can decide if you ask yourself these three questions. Number one, what do I have to offer? Maybe the same in many ways, but I'm unique, right? Each of us is unique in terms of our abilities, skills, responsibilities. Do we need to earn money? Are people dependent on, there are many questions, but it all comes down to what do I have to offer? The second question is, what are the real possibilities for me? Possibilities of action. There are so many problems. There's so much suffering. There's too many things, so we have to focus. What are the real possibilities given where I am, who I am? And the third question, the most important question, putting those first two questions on the side, I think we need to go inside and really ask ourselves, what tugs at my heart? Where does my love, how does it want to express itself? Go beyond ego, go deeper than ego. What pulls at me? What do I really want to do? And it's really looking for something deeper than self, deeper than ego. Because if we can find that, then we're most likely to be most energized and most effective. So I think these three questions, it's really important for us. We can do them also in groups, but in response to the extraordinary challenge that we face today, I think these questions can be really very helpful in helping us focus on how we can respond to the great crises we're facing.
Pero ¿cómo cambiar ese estado de consciencia, ¿no? ¿Qué soluciones propone a la situación, a la crisis ecológica, por ejemplo, que estamos viviendo?
In many ways, that is the greatest challenge of all, isn't it? Yeah. I think there is a kind of silver lining to the kind of crises that we are facing right now. Noam Chomsky, very important American thinker, he says we are now living in the most dangerous moment in human history. I think he's right. It's not only the ecological crisis, it's nuclear war, democracy is disappearing in many places. So it's basically what it means. It's right now a huge, huge crisis. The good thing is that if we understand what's happening, it can really cut through a lot of our old habits. It's like in this time of extraordinary urgency, it's obviously not enough just to bury ourselves in consumerism. It's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to be successful. So what the crisis does, I think, is it actually does ultimately tend to wake us up, in that it really helps us to ask, what's the most important thing?
La nueva conciencia vendrá del colapso del paradigma dual.
It's interesting that in Buddhism, there's a lot of emphasis on this don't know mind. As one of my teachers said, our path isn't about clearing up the mystery, it's making the mystery clear. So there's a lot of inevitable uncertainty about the situation we are in. And inevitably, we are concerned about what's going to happen in the future. It's really important to distinguish grief about what's happening from despair. From a spiritual or Buddhist standpoint, despair and hope, it's a kind of head trip. It's a kind of fantasy world that we go into. Grief is feeling sad about what's happening right here and now. But and we need to get in touch with that, because that can be so powerful in shaking us up, in disrupting our usual self-centered ways, habits, ways of living, right? When it comes to action, I talked a minute ago about how we can decide what to do. I think the single most important Buddhist contribution here is the idea of non-attachment to results. This is easy to misunderstand. It doesn't mean we don't try our hardest. We need to be as strategic, as careful as possible. But ultimately, we can't control what's going to happen. So because of the spiritual path, because of being rooted in meditation, which is always teaching us, let go of concepts, let go of this, let go of that. When we act in the world, we do the very best we can, not knowing if anything we do is going to make any difference whatsoever. And that's okay. We have the responsibility to do that, but we can't control the results. What we do now is our gift to the earth. And like every real gift, we don't give a gift because we're wanting something in return. It's our gift. We give it freely. I'm going to live this way. I'm going to do what I can now. Is it going to make a difference? I don't know, but that's okay. That's what I'm called upon. That's the way that we're called upon to live now. And it's important for us to feel and to respond appropriately to that call. Will it make any difference? I hope so, but I don't know.
Hablas mucho de un concepto de fraternidad universal, de mente global, de conciencia plural. ¿Cómo pasar, ¿no? de esa conciencia individual, egoica, a esa conciencia global? Que de cierta manera recuperar los principios de la ilustración, que muchas veces tú hablas de ellos, ¿no? De la igualdad, de la fraternidad, de la libertad. ¿Cómo dar ese salto de este momento tan individual que estamos viviendo a esa conciencia colectiva?
The Buddhist teachers, they are the Dharma, the teachings, but they're also the Sangha, the community, right? In the West, as Buddhism has come to the modern world, we've emphasized the Buddha and the Dharma, but the importance of Sangha, the importance of community has been largely, if not completely forgotten, underemphasized, right? It's interesting that if we go back to the life of the Buddha was asked by his attendant, it seems to me that spiritual friends are really important. And the Buddha said, don't say it like that. Spiritual friends are the most important thing. In other words, community. When we see through the delusion of separate self, we are truly able to live and to thrive in community. It's our basic nature. Human beings, we are social creatures. We don't thrive when we're isolated in in a cave or in solitary confinement in a prison. We need each other. We become most human. We express ourselves most completely in that kind of context. So it seems a natural thing that the Buddhist tradition will grow more and more in that direction. Right now, we hear so much, at least here in the US, there's so much about, because of climate crisis, we should reduce our carbon footprint, right? Let's individually, each of us individually, but that's not enough. We also have to work together. We have to come together as communities in order to address structural, institutional problems like late capitalism, for example. So I think Buddhism, frankly, is moving more in that direction. Is it moving quickly enough? That's a good question. I don't know.
Estamos viviendo en un momento en el que socialmente todo el sistema nos separa unos de otros, ¿no? O sea, nos comunicamos a través de los móviles, a través de la tecnología, a través de las redes sociales, y justo el sistema capitalista en el que vivimos no crea Shanga, lo que hace es separarnos.
When we meditate together, it seems to work against that, but there's still the question of what's going to motivate people to meditate, what's going to motivate them to wake up individually. That, I think, is the great question. I think the kinds of suffering, frankly, that have begun are going to push more and more people in that direction, because I think there will soon come a time when the religion of consumerism isn't available for most people anymore, or many people anymore, those options. I think we can already see there's a lot of suffering that's started, and it's going to get worse. And consumerism isn't going to resolve that, even though some people will try to sort of bury themselves in that.
Sí lo hemos hablado, pero me gustaría que explicara con más detalle el concepto de dukkha, de sufrimiento en el budismo.
Dukkha is actually the single most important concept in Buddhism. If you think about the Four Noble Truths of the Buddha, they're all about dukkha, cause of dukkha, end of dukkha, how to end. So dukkha is the word translated into English usually as suffering. But that only works if you understand it in a very broad sense to include dissatisfaction, anxiety, dis-ease, and the fundamental, there are many types of dukkha, but the most problematic ultimately is the dukkha that comes from the delusion of separate self.
La tercera noble verdad del budismo es que también el dukkha se puede eliminar.
What's interesting about it is within the Buddhist tradition, there's a bit of a ambivalence or difference, because many people will understand that solution as something transcendent. It means that after you die, you go to Nibbana or somewhere else. That's one interpretation, maybe not so different from Christianity. But the other understanding is that that nirvana, the state of enlightenment, it's not about going somewhere else, it's about realizing the true nature of this world here and now. So the fundamental idea here is that the problem is we live in a fantasy world, created by our ways of thinking, by our sense of duality, separation. And when we fully wake up, we realize, hey, this world is very different from what I thought it was. And that can be nibbana or nirvana.
¿Por qué siendo consciencia nos encarnamos?
We can understand the situation, I think, just in terms of awareness. We can forget about metaphysical questions. Think about simply our awareness. Usually our awareness is trapped. It's kind of caught because of the way of thinking. I am addicted. I've got to, because I have the delusion of separate self, I feel inadequate. I'm lacking something. I've got to find something out there that will fill me up. Money, fame, the perfect partner, whatever, something out there. That mind isn't free. That consciousness, that awareness isn't free. It's trapped. Okay. Now, when we can let go of ourselves, as we say in Zen, forget ourselves, consciousness, awareness is liberated. It doesn't mean that I'm aware of everything at the same time, but it means it's not trapped. It's like I can respond appropriately to the situation. And that refers to a famous Zen story. That's the fruit of a lifetime of practice, to respond appropriately, not overlaid by greed and what's in it for me, but out of a sense of non-separation and wanting other people to be, to relieve their suffering, for them to be happy. So it's the difference between a consciousness that's sort of trapped in very narrow ways and a consciousness that's free, that can dance, that can play according to the situation without getting stuck, without getting trapped in any particular way of thinking or any particular craving, you see. That's really the important difference. Now, what happens after we die? You know, in the Buddhist tradition, we talk about karma, we talk about rebirth. Is it true? Physical, you know, that after we physically die, we will be reborn because of our, I don't know, maybe. But to be quite honest, I'm not very concerned about that. I don't know. And in a way, if that's true, it will take care of itself, won't it? Because I will someday die, so it'll either happen or it won't. That's not the interesting thing about right now. Right now, in either case, the joy of doing the best I can. If I die and that's the end, okay. If I die and something, oh, that's nice too. But you know, there's a kind of liberated consciousness awareness right here and now, and I think it's important for us to act out of that rather than worrying about what happens to me after I die. That'll take care of itself.
La historia del ser humano es muy paradójica porque es como algo, ¿no? Un ser que no tiene ningún problema, imagina que tiene un problema, crea un universo entero con el fin de resolver ese problema y luego de nuevo salir de él.
Yeah, the wonderful thing is the realization that the way I experience the world, including the way I experience myself in the world or part of the world, the important realization is that that's not the only way to experience the world. We take it for granted. We grow up with other people who think a certain way. They see the world in a certain way, and we learn to see the world in the same way. We learn to see ourselves in the same way. And the whole point of this path is the realization that the world as we normally experience it, including ourselves, is a psychological and social construct. It's a way of thinking. And because it's a construct, it can be deconstructed, which is what's happening when we're meditating. It's possible to let go of the construct and to experience the world in a different way. And it doesn't mean that it's a complete rejection of our usual way of experiencing the world, but it does mean that there's another side to it. And the spiritual path really is, first of all, experiencing that other ground or reality way of experience, and then integrating those two, integrating that realization into how I live day by day, responding appropriately to the situation. So the liberation is so much about realizing that I experience the world the way I do because of the way my mind works. And if my mind changes, I'm going to experience the world differently, and people will experience me differently, and they'll relate to me differently. And
¿Quién reconoce que es Brahma si no hay quién?
Buddhism doesn't talk at all about Brahman. But it's still the same question. If there's no self, who is it that wakes up, right? And it's the realization, you could say, that it's not as though the self disappears. It's the sense of separation. It's like realizing what we normally understand as the self is a kind of vessel for something deeper, something, I'm using metaphors here, but it's the realization there's something that flows through me that's deeper than my ego. And what is the nature of that which flows through me? What is the real nature? I don't know. I can't know. But I don't need to know. The task, I know it's something loving. I know there's a wisdom there. But more than that, in terms of what I can say, I can't grasp it. I open up to it. I let it flow through me. I don't really understand it, but that's not my job. My job is to embody and to manifest it. So who or what is it? I don't know, and that's just fine.
¿Cuál es el mensaje que quieres transmitir, David, cuando hablamos de Dharma y ecología?
So there's a number of things that'll be happening. I suppose the main thing that I want to emphasize is the double-sided spiritual path, which in Buddhism we call the Bodhisattva path, right? Still, for most people, they still feel there's this strong distinction between personal enlightenment, transformation, and social engagement. And we really, given the dangerous times that we live in, we have to realize that our spiritual path cannot be separated from engagement with the world. I think that's the single most important thing to emphasize.
Muchas gracias, David. Ha sido un auténtico placer hablar contigo y aprender de todo lo que sabes, de toda tu sabiduría y de todo tu proceso personal.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate your support here. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
These are such important issues, I think. So I'm always happy to talk about this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess we're done.
Yes, okay.
Okay.
We're done.
Well.